This week on To the Contrary.
First, the growing importance of women's issues in politics. Then, involving more women in international peace and security. Behind the headlines. For this Father's Day, how women's equality elevates men.
Welcome to the Contrary, a discussion of news and social trends from diverse perspectives. Up first, gender issues and the 2020 elections.
According to a June Morning Consult poll, 14% of Democratic voters rate women's issues as a top priority. That's up from 6% in May. That increase follows a jump in the number of states passing laws severely limiting women's reproductive rights, which has in turn sparked a growing number of Americans who want to defend abortion rights against this state onslaught. Senators Kirsten Gillibrand, Elizabeth Warren, and Kamala Harris have all detailed their policies to protect a woman's right to abortion if they are elected president. Harris wants to put a check on the ability of any state to enact laws contradicting Roe, while Gillibrand is proposing funding to ensure access to reproductive health centers in every state. But with a record-breaking 6 women running for the Democratic nomination, there has been a focus on other gender issues, such as maternal mortality and equal pay. The first debate is less than 2 weeks away.
So, Congresswoman Norton, will women's issues finally play a large role in the 2020 election, more so than in recent years?
Bonnie, I think we've already seen the prologue. It is women who are chiefly responsible for flipping the House this year.
I think it's about time, although I think they've played a big issue before. Back in '92, women's votes really did swing the election away from George Bush I. So it's not the first time, but it's time to see it more.
Millions of women marching in the streets aren't wrong, and I think we'll continue to see gender be decisive in this primary.
Well, certainly gender issues are important, but all issues are women's issues, and that goes from healthcare down to the economy, and I think those will still trump some of these gender-related issues.
Right, but the sort of stereotypical, if you will, women's issue, which waxes and wanes in terms of importance, right now is extremely important, not because anything the left is doing, but because the right is so aggressively trying to get Roe overturned. Is that why, do you agree, is that why women's issues are more important this election?
It's certainly why they're on the front page, and I think a lot of folks on the Democratic side, particularly women, they are thinking about, well, is this something that's going to disappear? But we are still very far out from 2020, and what could happen in the next year and a half would be remarkable. I mean, particularly if something negative happens in the economy or something happens on the foreign policy scene that no one expected. So I think it's, while right now it seems like these are big issues, I hesitate to say that they're going to be decisive factors in 2020.
Well, but the abortion issue, this was not a good move in these states.
By the right, you mean?
By the right, who are trying to pop up the abortion issue. The abortion issue is a fairly settled issue in our country. You're not going to see a turnaround on abortion, and by coming forward with the most extreme versions of abortion, what that has done is to take an issue which has not really been top tier for Democrats. For Republicans, abortion has long been a kind of top tier issue. Now they're making it a top tier issue for Democrats, and that is not good news for Republicans.
What I find amazing is the heartbeat bill had already been passed in several states before Georgia. The media only started paying attention when it hit Georgia. Now, Alabama, that was a whole other thing. When Pat Robertson thinks it's too extreme, I'd say that makes it too extreme.
But will your partisan voters agree with you? Do you see moderate Republicans straying to the Democratic side because of the extreme actions of the religious right in the South?
I was talking about this off camera, and I've seen something very interesting since Governor Northam made those comments about post-birth abortion. I've actually seen a lot of pro-choice Republicans horrified and seen them think really rethink their position on abortion and be less active on it because of it. They had a really chilling effect on pro-choice Republicans.
That's a disgusting mischaracterization of what the governor spoke about, and that kind of inflammatory rhetoric actually encourages violence against abortion providers, and there should be no discourse like
but
that.
that's
Nothing I said was inflammatory.
To go back to
Wait a
what
second.
he said.
What do you say that he said?
well, what Anne just said was post-birth abortion. There is no such thing as a procedure
addressed
like that.
it.
There is
He
no such thing as a
addressed it.
procedure.
Is that what he said?
addressed it.
The governor made comments about horrific situations that some families face where children are born, very much wanted, loved children are born, and they cannot survive. And it's a neonatal hospice situation. And that has been turned around by folks who took it out of context. The president is going around the country making up lies and making it essentially casting doubt on expectant parents going into the labor and delivery room around the nation. It's disgusting. It has no place in discourse. But I want to go back.
Wait, I just want to say one thing, though, and I want to get onto the individual candidates and where they are on this issue. But I've talked to many moderate Republicans. Not a one of them, it's interesting, has
I've gotten
brought
letters
up,
on it.
has brought up that issue, but they're all saying because it's like that kind of, they didn't see that, they didn't pay attention to that. What they are focusing on is all these laws, and they're saying, I'm going to be forced to vote. Usually I vote independent. I'm going to be forced to vote Democratic because the party has gone so crazy.
Yeah, I think you'll see that cool down because all those laws are going to get overturned in the courts. They're not going to go forward. But to say the inflammatory, I didn't make up his comments. We have video in what he said, and I was shocked. I got letters. I've talked to people who were just horrified, and it surprised me how much it moved people.
All right, back to when I interrupted.
Yeah, I think we need to talk about the real issue that's facing this country right now, which is that we have a radical anti-abortion movement that is deeply out of step with the opinions of this country, that Republicans are drastically overreaching, and the real issue is that they hate women. They really do hate women.
Oh, they don't.
They do. And in the Alabama bill, when it was being passed, it was fascinating. One of the things that was brought up, it was the question about, well, what about IVF? Does this apply to an embryo in a lab? And one of the people who voted for this bill said no, because it's not in a woman's body. This truly is a debate about women and the status of women in society.
Let's bring it on.
It's a debate that doesn't need to happen because the morning after debate, the morning after pill has really solved this issue. So it really all ought to go away. Nobody goes to a hospital now to have an abortion. Republicans ought to get off of it, and Democrats, I think, win on this issue simply because most Americans have long figured out there's going to be a division, but we are for the right.
I have been
choice.
tracking this issue. Believe me, I am very interested to see how often young women still turn to surgical abortion. And the most recent Alan Guttmacher Institute report says there's still more than 1 million surgical abortions per year. So maybe there are also another million, which means the number is growing from 1.2, 1.3 million to, I don't know the facts about the medical, the pharmaceutical abortions where you take a pill.
Well, I'd like to see. I'd like to see a survey on that because I am almost sure that today's young women know what to do if you think you may be pregnant, and it's certainly not to wait until it's 3 months. So I really don't think that young women are depending for the most part on surgical abortion. That doesn't mean I don't think that this right must be preserved.
All right. Now we all know the Hyde Amendment barred federal funds from going for abortion, even in Medicaid cases. This week, Joe Biden, former Vice President Joe Biden, reversed his position on the Hyde Amendment. Is this an indication that among Democratic voters, you better be straight down the line pro-choice?
Oh, I think absolutely. And I think actually the fact that he flipped is going to hurt him worse than what his position was. But I think to get through the primaries, he had to.
Why would it hurt him worse if
in the general election?
If even Anita Hill said she would probably vote for him this week?
Well, I will say this: in the general election, there are a lot of possibly disheartened never-Trumper Republicans that may not now vote for him because of that. There were a lot of pro-life Republicans that supported him because he had that position. So it'll be interesting but I think it could be a problem for him.
I mean, the anti-abortion movement in this country has been complicit in supporting an authoritarian president and really has something to answer for. But when we talk about Biden and the Hyde Amendment, I think it shows the incredible muscle that the abortion rights movement has developed, and it also tracks with public opinion. What we see is that Democratic voters, and it's 2018, not 2019, they moved decisively where it became a bigger issue for Democrats than Republicans in supporting a candidate. They want their candidates to support abortion rights.
And Elizabeth Warren has really started moving up in some polls, Patrice. She's now number 2 after Biden, ahead of Bernie in some polls. Is that because a lot of pro-choice Americans either want to see a woman in office next time or are, see her brand of pro-choice as more so than Sanders? Sanders has not developed a huge following among women-oriented women who care first and foremost about women's issues.
Well, I think it's broader than that. I think her appeal is that she brings ideas to the table on this issue, but also on economic issues. While I don't agree with any of them, I think she's putting forward some plans, some ideas that say, you know what, let's challenge the norm. Let's pull things a little bit further to the left. And I think for primary voters, that's great. For general voters, independents, not so great.
And your thoughts about Warren? Do you think that she is? Which candidate are your people where you are on choice? Which is, you stand up for choice in just about every instance, right? So people who are people with your placing that much importance on the choice issue, who are you standing behind at
I mean,
this point?
the field has been fantastic by and large, with the glaring exception of Biden, who has a very problematic history on abortion, but we saw this recent change on Hyde, which is welcome. I think on the question of Warren specifically, I personally am very proud to support her candidacy. I think she is the not Biden candidate who's most likely to advance, and I think it's time to cull this field down so we can have a more serious debate.
Last word, Eleanor.
Very policy-oriented. A lot of people like to see that. Very left. I worry about her, Warren, that is, in the general election.
Bonnie, I actually said on this show, last time I was on, when she entered the race, she would be the one to watch, that she was the best of the female candidates.
Interesting. Let us know what you think. Please follow me on Twitter at Bonnie Urbay or @To the Contrary. From women for president to women on the global stage.
Presidential daughter and advisor Ivanka Trump is the face of a new Trump White House initiative, a strategy on women, peace, and security that was rolled out this week. The plan, which has bipartisan backing, is aimed at increasing women's political participation in peace and security by giving them room at the negotiating table. If approved, all federal agencies and departments working on international issues will have to include more women in global conflict resolution, counterterrorism, disaster recovery, and safety for women and girls. The strategy stems from the Women, Peace, and Security Act passed by Congress in 2017. Researchers have found women's participation in solving these issues create more stable conditions for their countries.
Ann Stone, in between, before President Trump was in office and maybe since, but you were working with the State Department and doing a lot of international, global speaking on this very
Over 60
issue.
countries, yeah.
Will her initiative be successful?
I think it will, and it's long overdue. And
What does it need approval from him, from Congress? What?
I think he's already given his approval. The White House is going to get behind it. What's interesting is former Ambassador Swanee Hunt, a Democrat, years ago had a study commission showing that women are hardwired for peace. We are the peacemakers, and we recognize. In fact, UN had Resolution 1025 that women were always supposed to be a part of any peacemaking, and it's often ignored. But it's critical because we are the peacemakers.
Your thoughts?
Well, it stems from a statute. And of course, as you implement the statute, it can only do good.
Statute passed when?
2017.
Yeah. Recently passed statute. So whoever's president is supposed to be carrying it out. And I think he's doing the right thing. I'm very frustrated.
Why?
Because even in the House of Representatives, much less in the wider work that goes on for peace, women are still creeping around the edges, and I certainly hope this provides a way for women to make their voices heard and to say more of this. Let me see the evidence that you really are implementing this statute, and I think it's very good the president has moved forward with it.
Your thoughts, Patrice?
Yeah, I mean, it's exciting. I'm glad we all agree here. What I think is interesting and that women bring to the table is a knowledge about radicalization. I think their husbands, their sons, their nephews, and I think that they can bring to conflict discussions, to, after conflicts have been resolved, to identifying those people that should be on our radars. That kind of intelligence is very hard to cultivate. And so, I'm pleased to see the administration stepping forward and doing this. And, to the larger point about women in the administration, I hope to see more people. I mean, we had a fantastic UN ambassador that was a woman, and not just putting women in places for just because you need a woman in a seat, but qualified women, and I hope to see more of that.
Well, we don't see people in place, much less women, as major posts are being held now by acting. Nobody wants to be a part of this administration. They think they will lose their reputation.
It's not true.
Well, I've heard that in the legal community, because I was told by many lawyers who were interviewed for White House counsel jobs, President Trump doesn't pay his bills, so they wanted to stay away from those jobs.
He was a client of mine back in the late 80s. He paid our bills just fine. And I will say this, that there are a lot of people, a lot of very loyal Trump people that are waiting in the wings to be appointed, that are in holding patterns either because of the Senate or because of things in presidential personnel. There are a lot of people that want to serve this guy, and they can call me. I can give them a whole list of names.
I'm talking about nominations. I'm talking about nominations, and I hold up in the Senate.
All right, but let's get back to the issue of women internationally. Since the end of the Rwandan genocide, which was 20 plus years ago, we have known that it was that horrible war between the Hutus and the Tutsis, and we have known that it was the women, because the men were all dead at that point, who sat down and negotiated. They negotiated on the opposite side of the table with people who had murdered their family members. And only women can do this. Why is this still something that needs to be done? Why aren't there already women in all international negotiations?
Because our media doesn't give enough attention to. Look at the feminist majority for years did stuff overseas. People on the right, like Terry Neese, have done it. Their stuff gets no coverage with the positive stuff they do. Abigail Disney did the documentary Pray the Devil Back to Hell. If you haven't seen it, go see it, about how women caused the peace got Charles Taylor to get the heck out.
Liberia.
Exactly. And there are cases all over, but the media never gives it coverage. They need to celebrate that and push that out there, and that would give women more standing.
Your thoughts, Erin?
I think one thing that often gets left out of this discussion is not just that we need to include more women in the peace building process and peacemaking process, but also specifically women with disabilities. And I say that very intentionally because we know that rape and violence is used as a weapon against women, and in particular that impacts women with disabilities more and also causes disability within women. So I hope that we'll be extremely inclusive in this. This is an important international issue that rises far above any current administration.
But here's a challenge. Here in this country, the Violence Against Women Act, which should be very helpful for all women, neglected female genital mutilation. And that's a heinous crime,
bizarre.
A heinous practice.
And it even takes place
here in the United States.
Immigrant families here.
Yes, over I think 500,000 women and girls in this country are facing that. So, I agree with you. We need to tackle the violence against women overseas. We also need to practice what we preach here in this country.
Absolutely.
Well, and that is one thing that I'll never understand. Women doing that to the children of their own kind. It's horrible. Behind the headlines, does feminism help men, rather? We spoke to Alexander De Croo, Deputy Prime Minister of Belgium, who says feminism leads to a better economy and helps liberate men.
Feminism has always been seen as a topic which is about women, so by definition only women are allowed to talk about it. And then very often the solution to gender equality is then always being put in the direction of women have to solve it themselves. If you look at the definition of feminism, it means equal rights and equal opportunities for women and men. So by definition, we men should also be involved in this.
Alexander De Croo is Deputy Prime Minister of Belgium, having assumed office as Minister of Finance last year.
We would think, we're there. It's just a matter of time before gender equality will be achieved. I am convinced that as much as in Belgium as in the United States, it's not a matter of time. It's a matter of policy, and it's a matter of us men. And the role of us men in creating an environment where men and women have full opportunities to develop themselves is something that is not going to come by itself.
He has written a new book called The Age of Women: Why Feminism Also Liberates Men.
A lot of men see it as we create space for women to take a step forward, then we by definition will have to take a step backwards, which is the zero-sum game approach. And I think that's wrong. It's not a zero-sum game.
He argues that feminism is allowing more and more women to be productive.
What is this about in the end is it is such a wasted opportunity. We have half of the population, which is often highly educated, which has a lot of talents, and we consider that we're okay with not using that talent. We're okay with not giving opportunities to that talent.
What do we want? Now! What do we want? Freedom!
Aside from the social and moral reasons for feminism, Croo argues the dollars and cents approach has merit.
I'm not obsessed by growth numbers and by GDP and so on. What is important for me is that we create an environment where people can have a good life and can have a balanced life and can realize their dreams and so on. Now, I use the economic argument because I think that it's an argument that you could use towards men who often see feminism as a threatening thing, where I think that it's actually a liberating thing and it makes the pie just bigger.
So do you agree with Deputy Prime Minister Croo that feminism liberates men?
How wonderful that he's using his platform to shine a light on the urgent need for gender equality. And I think it's great. Yes, feminism is a political movement for political, social, legal equality for women and girls. That absolutely liberates everyone.
How? How does it liberate men?
Because what happens is gender roles and expectations that hold half of us back, they can also be quite confining for men. Men don't benefit when they're not encouraged to, for example, participate fully within caregiving. So that's a great example.
I think men can be more persuasive on these issues than women can. If men speak up, speaking to men, they have a very special credibility. In the same way that during the Civil Rights Movement, started by blacks, but it got to be a national movement that everybody wanted to be a part of when whites joined in, black and white together, men and women together.
As you know, I'm one of the founders of the Women's History Museum, and one of the things we believe will happen as both men and women know the full participation of women throughout centuries, it changes the mindset. I've had men come up and go, my God, I can never look at a woman the same way again after they hear all these things they don't know women did. And I said, yeah, that's exactly the point. It's wonderful this guy is doing it. Finally, we need to see more of it happen. And the secret, as I tell people in third world countries, when they say, why are Americans succeeding and we're not? I said, look at half of our population that you suppress and we celebrate.
Your thoughts? I mean, do you think a man who is, if you want to use the word liberated, there's probably a better word, but if he thinks about himself like he doesn't have to be the breadwinner, he can be an artist and not make any money and be married to a Wall Street scion and let her earn all the money. Mm-hmm. Are those ways of liberating men in your mind a good idea?
Well, sure. I mean, if that makes sense for him and his family, that's certainly great. I think it's the freedom to choose what works best for you. When it comes to feminism, I think what some conservatives have pushed back on is that there's been tension. There's been an intense tension between men and women, and it plays out in a way that makes men feel like that like they're monsters, and that women feel like they need to be fearful of every man in their life. And I think that's what we need to be careful about when we push feminism.
So, but why is it? Go on a little more, if you would, please, about why so many men distrust feminism?
Well, I think it's been kind of the narrative that women are victims and that men are the perpetrators, whether that's college campus sexual assault, whether that's in the workforce and sexual harassment. And when we look at the relationships we have with most men, they're healthy, they're normal, they're respectful. You have those bad apples, and we deal with those bad apples. And unfortunately, though, the media has painted it as though every relationship with a man, every man in power is going to be a Harvey Weinstein. And I think that is what creates the backlash.
All right, terrific. Thank you all. That's it for this edition. Please follow us on Twitter and visit our website, pbs.org/tothecontrary. And whether you agree or think to the contrary, see you next week.